This is the Youth Soccer Revolution Podcast, episode number 20. Welcome to Youth Soccer Revolution Podcast, episode number 20. It's been an awesome ride so far. Thanks so much to all of you for listening in. Again, I can't thank you guys enough for all the positive support I receive, all the encouragement, everything that you guys send out to me. I really appreciate it. For our 20th episode, we have the first part of an interview with Stan Baker. Stan is a good friend of mine, and not only is he a great coach, but he's also a great person to know and get to work with the few times that I've gotten a chance to see him. Stan brings with him so much experience from all different countries that he's visited and studied in, and then obviously his experience coaching here in the United States, and then he's also an author. He has FIFA recognized licenses from Argentina, Brazil, Peru, and I know that he's also studied in Spain, which he'll discuss a little bit during the interview. And then one of, I think, a huge accomplishment that just goes to show the type of person and coach that he is. In 2011, he was the United States Youth Soccer Association National Coach of the Year for boys. So, I mean, what an accomplishment. What an honor to have him on the show and just talk about player development. It's really interesting to see the approach that he takes into player development. He's also involved and has certification with the Horsevine coaching methodology, which we'll discuss again a little bit, and that's actually how I met him through one of the conventions with Horsevine. But again, we'll discuss that during the show. But I do want to ask one thing from you guys. I don't ask much from you guys, but one thing I do want to ask is that if you go into the show notes for the interview of Stan Baker, which will be episode 20 and 21. I'm going to have a link where you can go and vote for the Comcast Sportsnet's inaugural All-Star Coach Program. Stan is one of the contestants there, and I don't know the other coaches there, and I'm sure they're very good coaches, but today I'm going to ask that you follow the link on the show notes and give a vote to Stan for Coach of the Year. It would be an honor for him to receive that. I know he definitely deserves it. And all it'll take is about 5 or 10 seconds to click on two links, go in there and vote on, click on his name and vote for him. So if you guys could please go out there and do this for me, I would greatly appreciate it. And I know that you'll definitely enjoy the show today with Stan. Before we get into our show, let's thank our sponsor, MyTeamSpot.com. You can receive a 60-day free trial with MyTeamSpot for our listeners only. When you use promo code YSE20. You can improve your communication with players and parents and share videos, photos, update schedules, and focus on player development, plus more with My Team Spot. Make sure you use promo code YSE60 to receive a 60-day free trial. Go to youthsoccerrevolution.com/MyTeamSpot. Click on the link and get on there and get your 60-day free trial. Also want to thank Audible. Go to youthsoccerrevolution.com/Audible and receive your free download when you sign up for a free trial. Thank you, Audible, and thank you, My Team Spot, for sponsoring our podcast. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. So without further ado, here is the author, 2011 U.S. Youth National Coach of the Year, Stan Baker. Right, today I'm joined by Stan Baker. Stan is currently the Director of Player Development Coaching Education at Hillsboro Soccer Club in Hillsboro, Oregon. He's also the head boys soccer coach at Woodburn High School, and he's also has a ton of experience coaching. He has a ton of licenses from different countries, which I thought was really cool. He's also been a staff coach for the Portland Timbers, the director of coaching at Newburgh Soccer Club in also Newburgh, Oregon. Stan is also the author of a youth soccer development book titled Our Competition is the World, which you can find on Amazon, and I will put all that stuff in the show notes. So Stan, I've given our listeners just a little bit about what you've done over the last few years and over your coaching experience, but why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself so we can get to know you a little better.
Sure. I originally grew up in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and have lived in countries such as Spain, in South America, and Peru. I've been in Brazil and in Argentina. I've been a teacher for about 20 years and have been coaching most of that time, and even prior to that, actually. I started when I was fairly young. I think I started at 13 helping run camps for a gentleman named Frank Mangiola, who was a national staff coach in California. And so I basically was I was a player. I played the game for a long time, and got into coaching after the World Cup in 1994. I'd left the game for a few years when my playing days ended, but I got the bug again and got back into coaching about the same time I was teaching. I started my teaching career.
Okay. Tell me, how high did you make it into soccer, or how serious were you?
As a player, I played university soccer. I played up in Canada. At the time, they had just been in the World Cup in '86, and so they had a professional league, and were a little more developed at the time, and so I ended up going up there to the University of Alberta in Canada. In California, I'd grown up playing with the California state teams and that type of thing, and was involved in a national. The highest I got was just a tryout camp. It was much less organized at that time than it is now.
But I mean, getting there to the national tryout, that's still a very high level, Stan.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to be in an area that was a hotbed for soccer. Some of my teammates that I grew up with have influenced the game at different levels, such as Dominic Kinnear, who coaches. He's now at San Jose Earthquakes. Was at Houston. John Doyle was a teammate of mine, who's a GM at San Jose Earthquakes. There are a number of others. Lev Kirshner, who coaches at San Diego State. We had a number of people come out of there who have influenced the game, who are coaching directors throughout the country.
Wow. So you weren't kidding, that was a hotbed for soccer. And I got to say, Stan, I mean, you're a very humble guy, so I know you don't want to talk about yourself much, but we really want to learn from your experiences and what you went through. So, don't be afraid to talk about some of the accomplishments that you've made, because those are very important and they make up who you are. So, we're obviously very honored to have you on the podcast and sharing your knowledge. So I just want to make sure the listeners know that you're a very humble person and don't want to talk too much about yourself, but I'll try to get in there when I can, okay?
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no problem. We want to learn from your experience, Dan, and why don't you take us back when you first started playing soccer? I mean, when was it? How old were you? How was it introduced to you?
Well, I came from what I call a family that was not a soccer-first family. So my parents had not grown up in the game, and I was introduced to the game at 7, and I played 11v11 soccer on the big field.
At 7?
At 7.
Wow.
So that's what the game looked like back then. We didn't know any better. And it really wasn't until I was somewhere around 13 or 14 when I started playing small-sided games on cement. Whatever numbers we could get, we would sneak over our high school into the courtyard and play at night for hours at a time. So we would play 3v3, 4v4, 5v5 on cement and just put the goals down. And that's when my game really started to develop. But it was a little bit later on when it should have been happening at a younger age.
Yeah, absolutely. We always talk about that free play. Were there coaches there? It sounds like there weren't any coaches. It was just you guys in the neighborhood getting together and playing.
Yeah, there were no coaches. It was just get together and play, and we did a lot of that, really, all over the place. We would make up our own games, where it could be even just one player against another shooting, and one was a goalkeeper, one was taking shots, and we would rotate and make up different types of games that way as well.
And you said you guys played for hours at a time.
We would, and I fell in love with playing against the wall, and I think that was one of the areas that really helped. I noticed the difference very quickly, where it helped my technical game in all different aspects, receiving the ball and the first touch, shooting the ball, being accurate in passing to a target, just having fun, imagining that I was in the game. Back in '82 was when that was my first World Cup experience. Just watching it on TV. Before that, I had not been introduced to what the World Cup was, and it was very difficult to find soccer on TV. I had to watch the Spanish channel. Everything was in Spanish, and I would watch the games, and then I'd go imagine that I was a certain player or playing for a certain team, and play against the wall and take over an elementary school, shooting against the wall, dribbling around poles, whatever I could. And that's when I really fell in love with the game.
Yeah, how old were you then?
I must have been somewhere around 12, 13 years old, 12 or 13 or so.
Okay, and then you said, I felt that my game really took off. Why is that?
Well, I became more comfortable with the ball. That mixed with playing small-sided games where I was making a lot of decisions over, just a lot of decision-making happening and perceiving the game in small spaces was what really helped make a difference. But again, it was a little bit late on for me to develop to a higher level.
Where I first met you was in one of the Horst Wayne clinics, and we've talked a little bit about Horst Wayne on this podcast, and he's German, but he lives over in Spain, and he's the creator of the Funinho game, which is a 3-on-3, and I mean he talked about the game intelligence and how much you can increase it by playing those small-sided games, like you just discussed.
Right. So I mean, I could mention also, when I was 17, I went to live in Spain and play over there for a year, and did a lot of playing again on futsal courts. I went to I think it was the second futsal World Cup before it was even FIFA recognized in Spain, and that helped open my eyes to what and they call it football sala over there in Spain, and I was able to see the final between Brazil and Spain. It just really blew my mind to see the skill and the quickness of the game and the passing and the movement. Going back to player development now, I think one of the biggest things, and I am influenced by Horst Wayne from Germany, who has been basically all over the world. He's been at many different academy clubs in Mexico, and he's been to South America, specifically Uruguay. He's worked with people in Uruguay. He's been on radio programs, I know, in Argentina. And his philosophy is probably most tied with Spain, because he wrote the manual for the Spanish Soccer Federation that they've used for the past 20 years over the development of their youth programs, and I think he has played at least a part in it, in the development of players. And then over time, Spain has taken their game to a different level, winning the European Championships and the World Cup that they.
Your player development. You started playing a lot of street soccer, and then you went to Spain. And then how did you end up in college?
I came back to California and went for 1 year to University of California at Davis, and I was lucky enough to have a coach who was from a former player at Real Madrid. Again, reinforced the influence of a coach in the style of play from Spain. I was really looking to try to play professional soccer and get to whatever the highest level was I could. And so I ended up transferring to the University of Alberta, which was one of the top-ranked teams in Canada. It had Canadian national team players, youth national team players, players that had played in World Cups. And basically they had every player on the team was playing in the Canadian Soccer League at the time, which was their professional league. So it was a pretty good level of play. It was a different style of play, though, that I was accustomed to, and it was difficult for me to adjust to it because I was coming out of Spain and then from California, where I was playing with players from Mexico and a lot of Latin American influence. And when I went to Canada, it was very much more a European influence game, much more British oriented, with power and speed and the physical nature of the game.
So what position did you play?
It varied. When I grew up as a youth player, I was mostly I was a back, so I played outside back.
Mm-hmm.
But when I moved to the higher levels in college, I played up front as a forward.
Wow. So when you talk about as a 12, 14-year-old, really opening your eyes up to soccer when you were introduced to street soccer and playing on the streets, and really improved. To be an offensive player, you really got to hone those skills, those technical skills, in the final third of the field. So I have to agree with you. I mean, it must have improved a lot if you went from defense to offense, because most of the time kids go from offense to defense if they want to make it at a higher level. Would you agree?
No, most definitely. I think that there are a lot of players who end up dying out. They get put and pigeonholed into one position, usually at the back. They don't see the field the same way. It's much easier to see the field from the back than having to worry about players coming from different angles. When there's more pressure up front, there's more pressure in the midfield than there is at the back. And I think
absolutely.
What happened was really, to be honest, I was not one of the better players at the beginning. I was surrounded by a number of very good players. And my game, it took playing small-sided and playing against the wall to where I developed more attacking skills, where I was comfortable with the ball and better in 1v1 situations. And that happened later. It took time for me to develop because I didn't start at 7, before doing that. I was not playing a lot of 1v1, which we know we need at the younger age levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mark Burke, who played for Aston Villa, came on the podcast as well a few months ago, and he talked about the importance of finding that wall, how it's your best friend, and here you are, reiterating that it can be your best friend. It should be your best friend. You find the wall and go get better. I mean, you don't need anyone else, just the ball, you and the wall.
So true. And I what I try to do, I know there are a lot of coaches who do private trainings, and I tend to not believe in that as much. Although if it excites a player and gets them motivated to go and do work on their own, then I'm okay with it. What I think we need to try to encourage our players to do is to become self-reliant, to encourage the love of the ball and being around a ball and the imagination of the game as much as we can. But that it ultimately comes from the player. You have to have a player who loves to go to the wall and imagine that they're playing in a World Cup or for a professional team, and that they have fun with it, because if they don't, then they won't go back. But I try to teach players, instead of going and doing individual work with them, I try to get them into either small groups. I do small group training, which I believe in helping perception and decision making, as well as the technical part of the game. But I also teach them how to go to a wall. What do you do at a wall? And, it almost seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem, it seems a little awkward to show someone how to go to a wall and enjoy the wall and have fun against it. But I've had to do that in the past.
Yeah, because I think what you're doing, Stan, is you're basically recreating what made you such a good player. You saw the difference in your game when you found that wall and when you started playing those small-sided games, and so you've lived through it, so you've experienced it, and you know what it takes, and you did it. And I think we get that a lot from like the South American players, some of the poor European players, where, they say that, hey, I just played by myself, and then when someone would come along, we would make a game of 1-on-1. 2 more kids would show up. It's a 2-on-2 now. 3 more, then we play 3-on-2 or whatever we have to do. But those small-sided games and that wall that they would find, and they talk about it so much, but
right, and then it's free as well.
Right.
There no coaching charges. I think that is, if we're getting back to player development, this is one of the biggest problems we have in the United States that I have seen, is that our coaches we don't believe that we are coaching unless we are controlling the situation, the practice session, everything about it. And I try to get my coaches to realize that, especially at the youngest age group, before we start getting into heavy tactics, and we still teach some tactics at the youngest ages, but it's more about concepts, important concepts, more than full team tactics. We try to get our players to be comfortable in small-sided situations where they're not standing, there are no lines, laps, and lectures. Our coaches are less in control, and it's very difficult because we tend to see the game in terms of other sports sometimes in this country, where the baseball players are controlled, the strategy is controlled by the coach, football plays are sent in by the coach, and everything's planned. There are timeouts in basketball where plays are set up, and none of that is possible in the open game. And when I mean open game, soccer is that it's constantly changing depending on where the ball is, the team, your teammates, the opponents. And all of that changes constantly, and there are no timeouts, you can't stop the game. So the players need to be able to learn what to do a lot from the game itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way you can draw it up exactly how it's going to happen in the game. I mean, it's almost impossible because, the field, first of all, it could be 100 by 120 meters. So they get so big that and the kids may just not be able to put everything exactly the way you drew it up in the practice. So it's extremely difficult to redo it when you're in the game. So like you said, it's very fluid, like Horst discussed. That the game intelligence is so critical, but yet we can't. There's no way to measure it. You can't take out a measuring device and say, oh look, they kicked the ball 40 yards, or they kicked it 120 miles an hour. There's no way to measure that game intelligence, but yet it's one of the critical factors of a good player.
Right, and that I go back to Horst's philosophy quite a bit because it's a great way to start allowing the players to develop all 3 areas of their game: the perception of what they see on the field, and then to make a decision about what to do, and then to execute it with the technique. So we try to get the players into these very small-sided at first, the games that he sets up. It's basically trying to recreate as much as we can the street soccer environment. So they play 3v3 games is the standard, and we call it Funino, which is Fútbol a la medida del niño. which is basically in English means soccer tailored to the level of the child, or that it's based around the level, the age level and the cognitive level, the physical level of the child. So the fields are smaller. We play just 4 wide goals as much as we can. And I know that when we play this game, the Funinho game, to 4 wide goals, it helps to develop things such as playing out of the back, switching the point of attack, allowing players to make decisions about which goal is least defended. So we tend to play in that game with odd numbers, and I know that there are other ways of doing it that are just as fine and can work just as well, and without getting hung up on any numbers at all. But when we play the 4-goal game, we try to play with odd numbers such as 3v3 or 5v5, because the opponent, our players, we want them to decide which goal is least defended, so that they can decide when to switch the point of attack, when to go quickly to a goal and try to create numbers up situations, the 2v1.
It's getting them to think.
Right, as much as possible. So the ball,
but on their own when they're in there, instead of us telling them what to do.
Exactly. And if we do nothing else but that, to put them in that environment, the players that I have seen at our club, and we're a smaller club, Hillsborough Soccer Club, and outside of Portland, we have not been eaten up by Portland Timbers Academy yet, although they have taken some of our players, and we systematically have players basically recruited and taken after we develop them. In the last 2 years, we've really been doing it. We've been committed to it, the Funinho game, at the 7 to 9-year-old age group, and those kids who have played it are much more comfortable on the ball. They play a constructive soccer with the ball on the ground mostly. They're not scared of taking on opponents 1v1. They tend to understand the 2v1 situations better. It's the whole game, and it sets them up for now to later on and Horst is big into fitting the game to the child's level, just like shoes fit a child or clothes fit a child. You wouldn't put on adult shoes to the child because they just don't. They're way too big and they don't fit and it'd be clumsy.
Mm-hmm.
But as they get older, 7 to 9, they play 3v3, then they play 5v5 at practice at 10 years old, and then they go to the 7v7 game like they do in Spain, and we play 7v7 basically all the way to 14 at practices, at least, just because of the numbers. We don't have huge teams, but you can always end up playing 7v7.
Yeah. And while we're on the horse topic and the Funinho topic, you translated a few of his books. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which ones were there?
The first one I did was his Funinho book I took it from English into Spanish. Then
wait, you did it from English to Spanish, or from Spanish?
I did that one from English to Spanish.
Oh, so he wrote it in English first?
I think it was originally maybe it was in German, I don't know. But it ended up in English, and I took the English version and translated it into Spanish, which they used those books in Sevilla, and they introduced that game to that federation in the south of Spain.
Because I have the English copy, I don't have the Spanish copy, but I always thought for some reason it came from Spanish to English, but Horst speaks like 5-6 different languages,
right.
So who knows which one was written first.
Exactly.
But and also on the topic of books, was Funinho the only one that you did, or were there more?
The second one I worked on was it's a counter-attacking book, and that one I took from Spanish into English.
Okay, and I have the Spanish version of that one, so okay. But yeah, great job. What I want to discuss next is your own book. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your own book?
Well, my book was originally because I was put in situations where I had to convince the parents and my players, but mostly my parents, of my methodology. And I started with using using it as a support for the United States curriculum, and I don't get too hung up on curriculums, although I do believe in a plan, having a philosophy and a plan. But there was a time when out here in Beaverton at the Nike campus, they had invited somewhere around 100 to 150 of the top youth coaches in the United States, and they unveiled the new curriculum with Claudio Reyna.
Okay, so that was recent. What, like 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah,
6 maybe.
So They were here, and I tried as hard as I could to get inside, but I was not invited. So I heard about it. I watched the podcast or the video of it, and that's how I got the title. Because Claudio Reyna was, he mentioned that our competition is not in the room itself. It's not amongst ourselves. We shouldn't be playing everything at the youth level to win. Our competition is the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And so we need to work on how we're developing players and work together to bring our players the best environment possible. And so that's kind of where it started, along with the fact that I was really trying to play on the ground, have my teams play out of the back, from the goalkeeper. When you're playing it, and I would inherit a team at 14 or 15 that had not played that style, and to try to change them at that time that late in the game was very difficult. I ended up writing the book with that in mind, but it grew from my experiences having been in all the different countries, Brazil and Argentina, Spain, Peru, South America. And I think from each country, I got something different to add to the book. From the United States, I got the whole thing about players not being motivated and dropping out of sports altogether at around 13 or 14. And mm-hmm. we had they put out statistics, and I mentioned the statistics in the book about how many of our players drop out. So I put in the book, for example, what I got from my time in Brazil. I was very lucky to have gone to the very first license that was offered by the CBF, the Brazilian National Federation, at their training center outside of Rio.
What year was that, Stan?
Probably about 2008. And
that was their first, educational
right.
class?
Yeah, they had their licenses prior to that had been run by organizations or associations, like coaching associations from
mm-hmm.
the different regions of Brazil. But this one was put on, they call it Escola Brasileira de Futebol, and it was put on by the National Federation.
Gotcha.
And it was the very first license, and it was a youth license, which was perfect for me. And what I got out of that, and I can share with the
yes, please,
is the number one thing that they brought to my attention was the importance of warming up the spirit at every practice. As an opening, instead of running around the field or doing something really boring, they would warm up the player's spirit by playing some kind of a game. Could be a tag game, could be, involve the ball. There are a lot of different types of fun games that we play. Even in the United States, we tend to think of our youngest players, though, as the ones that play those games, and then they outgrow them. But the Brazilians were bringing these games all the way up to their U17 national team. I watched them use these warm-up-the-spirit games. And
interesting.
The other thing I got from them was, even at the higher levels, and you mentioned before that we're always trying, even at the highest level, the players are still refining their game. They would set out from a ping pong ball, then a tennis ball, a Brazilian rubber ball, then all the way up to a regular size ball. And the players would begin with the tennis or the ping pong ball and work their way up. So they got touches on the ball, juggling. We're talking juggling of the ball, keeping it in the air, with 4 different textured size balls, right at the beginning of the training session. And I saw the same thing in Argentina when I watched professional clubs such as Independiente, where they would put tennis balls out. They didn't have all the different size balls, but they put the tennis balls out and regular size ball, and they would go back and forth in the pre-warm-up, even before the warm-up started. So everybody got to touch the ball right away.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you talk about, the way Brazil, one of the big keys, one of the big points that you took away from your license there, about them trying to, did you say the spirit of the game?
Yeah, warming up the spirit of players.
Yeah. Which is basically, the environment, just trying to create a positive environment for the players to get prepared for a hard practice, for them to go hard, but at the same time, it's going to help them at the end of the day. And I think that's great. I try to do that. To be honest with you, Stan, I've always tried to do that. I want to get the kids to be happy and, and ready to play because, at the end of the day, it is a game and they're supposed to be having fun. If they're putting that first, I think it goes to show the reason why Brazil play the way they do, and so loose out there with so many moves. When they're out there playing, it looks like they're having a ton of fun. So I think obviously it's working for them.
Yeah, I try to bring that to our club as a whole, or even with top level teams I've coached, I bring that the juggling and different types of games as in the pre warm up.
So tell me about your Argentinian license. What's it called? The ATFA?
Yeah, they run theirs through the Coaches Association.
Okay, so kind of like the NSCAA here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. It would be a Coaches Association, Asociación de Técnicos de Fútbol Argentino. It's a 2-year program, and I did a lot of it online from a distance. That was the only way I could do it. Mm-hmm. And then I went down and did the practicum in right outside of El Estadio Monumental, which is the River Plate, where they play their games at River Plate. It was it was an eye-opening experience. It was very good, very thorough. The first year is a youth license, where they focus on the youth development, and then the second year is called a pro license, and it's basically your adult level players. Things that I got from Argentina: the Argentines approach the game differently, I would say, than they do in Brazil a little bit. They're a little more serious about the game, although they love it. They're both very passionate, but they're a little more serious about it. I have connections with people down there that now we brought to our club last summer a coach from Vélez Starfield Youth Academy, and he put on one of the best clinics I've ever seen in the United States.
Wow.
Why was it so good? It was basically, it fit very well with our game model. He started with presenting the game model, which is how they play at 11v11. And at Vélez, especially Vélez is well known for developing players. They start, even at a young age, they train much more than we do. They have different types of training indoor. They have a wall training. They have a lot of small-sided games, but they also teach the players the game model at 11v11 for short periods starting at 8 years old. Mm-hmm. So they'll have them walk through for about 45 minutes a week. The ball's here. Where do you move? We have the ball.
And Stan, Do they play games, or do they just kind of introduce the 11-11 game?
They just introduce it. Although in Argentina, they play a lot of 11v11 at even younger age levels.
Okay.
But they mix that playing in the street with friends at small-sided games. They play a lot of futsal, especially in the interior, but it's still popular in Buenos Aires. But in Rosario, I know it's in other places outside of Las Provincias, they play a lot more futsal than they would, and all that comes together to give them a varied texture of experiences. So they're not just playing at young ages at 11v11. We know that's not the best for development, but they do that along with other things. So they're not just playing 11v11.
Yes, and I think that's the key there, is that they're being introduced to the 11-11 game,
yes.
But it's after the fact that they are constantly playing the small-sided games.
Exactly.
And you mentioned Rosario. That's where is that where Messi's from?
Yeah.
And Maradona, how far away from there was he? Was he from around there as well?
He was
I forget.
from Buenos Aires. Outside.
Okay, Buenos
yeah.
Aires. Okay. So we've discussed your book. Anything else that you want to say about your book? I know we kind of got off the topic, but
yeah, the book. I mean, it tries to bring together some of the best training techniques. It also gets into areas that are of importance, such as the mental part of the game, the perception of how to train perception, and other things about the game. Talks about motivation, how important that is. I mentioned Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which is it's very important if you're working with children of any age, really. I mean, that I mentioned in the books, that there are different mindsets, and
they can definitely pick it up at Amazon.
Yeah, on Amazon, yes.
Yeah, so I'll put a link on there as well in the show notes, but obviously they can go to Amazon as well and pick it up. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Was there something else?
No, I mean, I could. There's just a lot in the book from different angles. I guess that's what I want to come across with it. There are things in there from the different countries I've visited. A heavy influence from Spain, the Spanish philosophy, from Horsbein, from Argentina and Brazil.
Yeah, and those are good countries to be associated with when you discuss soccer. So definitely go pick up the book and take a look at it and let us know what you think.
So I hope you've enjoyed the first part of the interview with Stan Baker. I know I have learned so much from Stan over the years, and I hope that you will do the same. Don't forget to go on youthsoccerrevolution.com and go to episode 20 of the podcast, and definitely click on that link. Take 10-15 seconds out of your day, and if you like the podcast, if you could please do this for me and Stan, go to the link, click it. It'll take you straight to where the voting is. Go ahead and click on Stan's name, click vote. 2 or 3 clicks, it'll get you there, and you're done. Guys, if you do this for me, I really, really appreciate it. I know he definitely deserves it, and I know from listening to the interview, you must feel the same way as well. So definitely go out there, support Stan, send him an email, let him know how much you appreciate him coming on and sharing his knowledge. And I'll get episode 2 up as soon as possible. I want to thank my sponsors again. Get your free audiobook through Audible. Go to youthsoccerrevolution.com/Audible. Also want to thank My Team Spot. Make sure you go to youthsoccerrevolution.com/My Team Spot. It's a team management tool, guys, that you definitely need if you're a coach. Get on there, try it out, and see what you think. Let me know if you like it. I want to make sure that I'm promoting good products that are part of our podcast. I don't want to take up your time with things that aren't working for you. So I definitely want to get some feedback from you guys as well if you've taken advantage of the promo code YSE20 for myteamspot.com, and let me know how it's working out for you. Don't forget to vote for Stan. You only have until March 22nd to vote. make sure you get on that link right away as soon as you listen to the podcast and vote for Stan. Again, thank you so much for listening, guys. I appreciate it. I'll catch you on the other side.